Testing, testing. Hello. Okay. By my count, it is 5:30 p.m., which is when things typically begin. So, hello, everybody. Welcome back to another installment of our visiting lecturer series here in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at the University of Macau. Today, we are joined in person by Professor Yuan Wu, who is joining us here from Shanghai Jiao University in China. Professor Wu received her bachelor degree in philosophy from Wuhan University, and then both her MA and doctoral degrees from Tsinghua University in Beijing. She has been at Shanghai Jiao University for over a decade now, and in that time has also had a few visiting positions, one for a year at St. Anthony's College in Oxford, and then another at UC Berkeley's Department of Philosophy just a few years prior to that. Her academic interests focus largely on moral and political philosophy, but also Chinese philosophy and comparative philosophy across the East and West. She's published many papers on Mohism in recent years, with critical reflection on ingrained and still popular views pertaining to Mohism, such as that Mohism is a form of consequentialism or utilitarianism, and that the most idea of jian'ai or jian'ai, pronunciation, jian'ai, which equals the idea of to love without distinctions, and that the most political theory promotes a kind of despotism and other things. So she's been trying to address these sorts of views about Mohism, perhaps with a view to correcting and improving them. Today, the title of Professor Wu's presentation is Universal Love or jian'ai and Not Loving Robbers. Just before I hand things over, I would like to remind those of you who may be unaware, though I imagine that's probably zero of you by now, since this is not our first event together, that after the official proceedings here, which will adjourn around 7 p.m., we will continue things informally downstairs on the ground floor at the Port Club. So if you're interested in continuing to chat, perhaps with our visiting speaker or amongst yourselves, please feel free to join us downstairs after the fact. With all of that being said, I would love it if we all came together in welcoming our visiting speaker.
Thank you for having me here. So what I'm presenting today is a work in progress, jian'ai and not loving robbers. So I look forward to brief comments from my further. So in a way, it's dialect. I can see now. The lesser selection, there is a piece of text that can be seen as stating a thesis of not loving robbers. So it
Just to make sure it's shared.
So it says, although robbers are people, loving robbers is not loving people, and killing robbers is not killing. So some have seen this as like contradiction to the Buddhist own doctrine of jian'ai, which is supposed to be all-inclusive, meaning loving all people. So this doubt seems to gain its strength, especially if we compare it with a seemingly parallel thesis from the lesser selection, which we employ as the thesis of loving poor. So it claims poor is a person, loving poor is loving. So here, poor is a typical proper name, an abusive name for ones who don't have your business. So these two theses share a symmetrical form, but come from unsymmetrical. So this may make one doubt whether the law is a logical. So there are already scholars who try to explain why there is no contradiction between jian'ai and not loving robbers. So among these scholars, basic brand is represented. So he appears to distinctions in ordinary usage of the words. So he says, "Sha Dao killing robbers" implies just application. 杀人, like English killing people suggests wanted for murder. Um, Not only for noise, but also in order to use it. Now, according to him, the standard that the noise appear to distinguish what is just and unjust is a utilitarian one. That is, they justify the killing of robbers because it contributes to general benefits. My interpretation is quite different. And this slide, just like a brief summary. So basically, I rely on a pair of concepts, moral goal and side constraint. So I will argue jian'ai is not merely proposed by Boyce as a moral goal, but also as a side constraint. In the sense that its minimum requirement not to harm the innocent serves as a moral constraint set upon all actions, including the endeavor to pursue the moral goal jian'ai itself. It is this side constraint that warrants jian'ai is not pursued at the cost of jian'ai in many ways. This is not to harm the innocent works as a side constraint. The robbers, by definition, avoids tax goes to detention to harm the innocent. So the claims of both robbers, both their maxim and actions, can be understood as an equivalent articulation of the side constraint. It does not contradict jian'ai, but rather sustains its logical consistency. So this is just a summary about. So in the second section, basically I will first define the key concepts I use, and afterwards I will argue that the Boyce actually set up a side constraint, which can be formulated as not harm the innocent. And then I will argue that this side constraint is institutive of jian'ai, and I will explain why this is so important. So basically, I borrowed this pair of concepts from Robert's proposing. So moral goal is an end state for some activities to achieve as a result, while side constraint refers to moral constraints set upon actions to be done. So it is like issuing a comment for all the actions. Don't violate constraints. I agree with Nozick that the mere goal directive is very different from a view that sets up a side constraint. So Nozick uses utilitarianism of rights as an example to explain the difference. So utilitarianism can be seen as a mere goal directive, but facing criticism that it can render the violation of rights as justified. Proponents of utilitarianism, they try to solve the problem by incorporating non-violation of rights to the law. However, as long as utilitarianism does not set non-violation of rights as side constraints, the same problem will remain unresolved. Because it can still justify violation of the rights of one person or few persons in order to maximize non-violation of rights. So I think that the implication rather than this paper is to ensure a certain value of principle not to be violated. It must be set up as a moral constraint upon all actions, no matter what they aim. And in this part, I will argue that Boyce is set up on a side constraint, which is not harm the innocent. So we can see their arguments, at least are developed based on two perspectives. The first is an argument based on an impartial observer perspective, which is best shown in this text. I'll quickly read it. Suppose there were a man who entered another man's orchard and stole some of his peaches and plums. Everyone who heard about it, then if those in charge of the government should be told of him it will punish him. Why is this? Because it is by harming another that he benefits himself. When it comes to murdering an innocent man, stripping him of his clothing, taking his parents, the degree of injustice is even greater. Not superior men of the world all realize this and condemn such actions and call it unjust. At the independent paper, focus this text, but here, I'm not going to get into too many details. So basically, I'm trying to say this text, the Mois are arguing that if ever one sees things from the perspective of an impartial observer, he or she will deem harming the innocent, that is, intentionally taking the possessions from them without their consent and causing physical damages to their bodies in the process as unjust. And in this sense, it is unjust for harm an innocent to be seen as a universal valid moral. The second argument is based on a could-be victim perspective. The voice said, viewing others houses as their house, viewing others as the result of the injury, so there will be no robbers. So basically, they're saying if ever you think of yourself as the could-be victim, you would agree that it is unjust for harm the innocent. So both arguments come to the same conclusion. It is unjust to harm the innocent. And this thus can be seen as a universal valid moral principle. And we can see it as a moral constraint that was set upon all actions, regardless of what these actions aim for. To prevent any actions that violate this side constraint is morally unacceptable. So we see that the boys emphasize this throughout the text. So they say, for example, they say killing one person is not unjust. And if even just one innocent person is killed, it will certainly be one calamity. And this side constraint, not harming innocent, is constitutive of jian'ai, as it is the minimum requirement of jian'ai. So first of all, of course, harming contributes carrying the body, right? And to harm an innocent, of course, contributes to their or lawlessness. Not harming the minimum requirement, carry the higher requirements like penalty. And in terms of the meaning of jian implies precise for avoid nuisance. So that means even if just one person is harmed, it's jian'ai. The noise that accurately points out that to qualify jian'ai, not to harm any innocent, must not be violent. So we say not loving people doesn't require comprehensive not loving people. If one doesn't comprehensively love them, on this basis, one concepts not loving. What is crucial for this table's thesis is that not harm the innocent is not merely a moral law, as it is constitutive of jian'ai, but a moral constraint set among actions practiced as any moral. So that means even in the pursuit of jian'ai, one must not violate the side constraint. So in the beginning, I think you may find this perplexing, right? Because if people aim to practice jian'ai and benefit from it, naturally they wouldn't aim to harm the innocent or moral law. On the contrary, it is part of the moral law that the innocent is not harmed. However, even if harming the innocent is excluded from moral law, if they do not set not harm the innocent side constraint, that constrains all actions, same for jian'ai, they will eventually be in the same dilemma as vegetarian or vice. That is, harm an innocent or a few innocent order maximize the realization of jian'ai. And in this way, this jian'ai eventually. And if the utilitarian interpretation provided, the Mohists would have been troubled by this very dilemma. As we previously mentioned, Brand initially appears to ordinary usage of words and distinguishes killing robbers as just execution, while killing people as unjust punishment. But his utilitarian interpretation drives him to make clear interpretation, which is very important. So it says there is no contradiction between voice perception of the universal law and the execution of criminals. The equal desire for the benefit of all, when applied with the voice, useless consistency, requires sacrifice of some for the benefit of the rest. Criminal sacrifice, perhaps the innocent. Very interesting. So according to his utilitarian interpretation, the Mohists, if to kill an innocent would achieve the moral goal, it is then morally useful and even fine. And if the consequence achieved by killing an innocent is equal that by killing a robber, the moral status of two scenarios is just the problem of this interpretation is not only that the ban also cures the distinction, the right thing, right, between the moral status of human beings, but also it does not well capture the voice of the stand. So I would say it is precisely because the voice insists that not harm the innocent should be set as a side constraint that must not be violated. They wouldn't be found. So we can see the voice standing on moral dilemmas is very interesting. So we say, if one kills another innocent person to save the world, it's not thereby benefit. If one kills oneself to save the world, it is thereby benefits. So if we compare the two scenarios here in this text, there are two ways to achieve the same goal. One through killing an innocent, and the other through killing oneself. And it is very interesting that boys see the former as wrong, very right, while the latter as right. So if the boys were utilitarian, it would be very difficult to explain why they disapprove former while approve the latter. Right? Since both scenarios result in the same consequence of saving the world and the process of one life. However, if we understand that the noise set not harm the innocent and side constraint, we could easily explain the distinction made. So in the former scenario, it violates side constraint, so it's more on side. While the latter achieves the goal and in the meantime does not violate side constraint. So it is not only morally acceptable, also even morally praiseful. And in this part, I will first explain that for Mohists, opposed robbers serve as a side concept. Then I will explain why the reasoning of flooding the poor and not flooding robbers, which I give a very superficial comparison. And in this section, I will explain why these two reasonings are both valid. And finally, I'll try to clarify the language, explaining the meaning changes of the laws in different combinations. The noise, they use the word "dao" as it is usually altogether. So as a noun, it refers to people who spill and rob others, actions like word or threat, and even in the process of physical damages with the bodies of options. Of course, this Chinese word can also be used as a verb, which refers to act. So oppose robbers obviously is an environment or cycles. Moreover, since don't rob or stop robbing, or don't be robbers or oppose robbers can be seen as equivalent expressions of not harm the innocent. So to oppose robbers is just a different way to articulate side prospect of harm. As far as, and thus it serves as side prospect. Because to oppose robbers is side constraint, it is morally unacceptable to pursue moral goals by the way of robbers. Otherwise, the law is not different from robbery. The law is a lot of moral goals such as benefit state, benefit value. These goals are often seen as very noble goals, right? But for the lawyers, these mere goals, they don't sufficiently justify actions aimed. So if actions aimed for these goals violate side constraint, then they're not different from what the robbers do benefit their own household. Here comes the part which I think is very important. So the noise doctrine of jian'ai makes opposed robbers side constraint, and this makes it distinguished from other doctrines that also make opposed robber moral without setting opposed robbers as a side constraint. So these doctrines we could take two possible points. The first possibility is suppose the doctrine also makes universal law a moral code, but it has no side constraints at all. I think the problem is we will eventually come to the previously mentioned dilemma, which is justify robbers by moral code of universal, even though harm the innocent is apparently not harm the innocent. The second possibility is suppose a doctrine also makes universal law a moral code, and it sets up a side concept, like a different one. Let's call it C apostrophe. That is a value of principle that is not constitutive of universal law itself. Then the value of principle set as side concept is what this doctrine actually preserves as that must not be violated in any case. So this implies the C apostrophe and C uncongruence. C apostrophe is the one who C has to be congruent. And this compromise is not only viewed as morally acceptable, but even morally required. And the problem of this compromise that is violent to C is that it can make the suit of personal self. Of course, probably a doctrine can claim to have multiple moral constraints and not harm the innocent. I think one of but I think what is uncompromised for this doctrine is seen as its real side. I'm not sure whether you have a real version of universal in real history, like the response to this experience, but I have some documents which is possibility. So the above two possible doctrines, they share the same overall with voice jian'ai. But since they do not set of those waters as the side constraint, they could make harmony in the center of the waters more with some and even more with the fire. And since the two possible doctrines apparently make the those water overall, we can say that in this sense, we are only the forwards. By comparison, the voice doctrine of jian'ai avoids these dilemmas. Is that not target in a sense for voice forwards as a side constraint? So they could avoid the first dilemma and they describe one response to jian'ai and possible violating the side constraint. And this side constraint is constitutive of jian'ai, avoids to avoid the second dilemma. As pursuit of jian'ai is not explained something that is incompatible with it. As jian'ai wouldn't be compromised with mind into something that is incompatible with it. Therefore, we come to the conclusion that it is less the noise set of harmony is those lovers as side constraint. The doctrine of jian'ai avoids possible paradoxes and it is to sustain its total existence. Here is the logic part. Now let's look at the reasoning A, which is the reason of loving for and the reason which is the reason of loving for. So A has two premises. The implicit premise is jian'ai, right? Jian'ai is all inclusive. The other premise, four is person. So combining these two premises, the conclusion, loving for is one. To this reasoning can be seen as a deductive reasoning. The conclusion, loving for is like a particular case, deductive, a more general decision about it. And the more is used for female slave to make the case, probably because poor are the most disadvantaged in the society and are often excluded from open for allowed. So the inference here that jian'ai implies or requires loving poor, great humanity presence is always. So even a person as low as poor should be loved is required by jian'ai. Of course, everyone else should be loved. According to the text, we find that jian'ai is all inclusive. This regardless of various factors such as birth, gender, and so in the case of loving. Also age, physical appearance, being close or distant with someone, being Chinese or non-Chinese. So in all these cases, same reason without the group. And jian'ai requires you to love these things. On the surface, the second premise, the reason that robbers are people, just parallels the second premise A. It seems that they both classify people into two different parts according to a certain criteria, and jian'ai should apply to each one, regardless of according to what criteria people are classified into these two. However, I would say the criterion to classify a person as a blogger or not is essentially different from the above mentioned criteria, such as age, class, or gender. The reason is the latter cases, those criteria themselves are irrelevant. We don't choose jian'ai except whether a person is old or young, rich or poor. That's why they're irrelevant. But to judge whether a person is a blogger or not, the very criteria is jian'ai itself. So in that sense, the second premise in reasoning A and reasoning B, and in fact also covered, and we should have to expect the two reasonings of this act. And I would say the reasoning of not loving waters is an application of the big law. It's not an application of law fiction. So as we have argued, not harm the innocent law, those waters is constituted with jian'ai. So watering based in so we use the logical language to formulate this. We can use J as an application, jian'ai, are the waters. Since water is baked in and this reasoning. So if J is, since R implies to negate J, so to negate R implies negate the negation of J. And that is negate R implies J. So this logical form doesn't add any substantial context to the arguments I described. Show the logical form. In this reasoning, if we accept that jian'ai seems to be already bubbles the big jian'ai by one division negate arms. And of course, what those rubbers can take different forms. It can take the form of disapproving damning rubbers that's in their actions, which is not loving rubbers, and the form of punishing sanctioning rubbers, which is loving or killing rubbers. The first one of a more than 100 people's perspective, clearly it could be debated whether capital justifiable or necessary. And it would be more plausible if the noise had only claimed that sanction or punishment robbers is valid. But maybe we could take it with the careful reading. I think they're not particularly justifying the practice of capital sentence during the time that was very popular practice. I think it's likely that I mentioned this particular kind of punishment for rhetoric purpose sounds rhetoric strong. So the above arguments focus on the logical connection of logic problems, which are both constants with our more intuition underneath the distinction of however, this attacks the noise that use not loving waters to express what those waters. So the verb to love still causes misunderstandings. His expressions, loving people, loving waters, they share the same verb plus one structure, same verb. So as Grant points out, even though the two terms human people and human waters, they share the same verb plus noun structure, the same verb to kill, but words change the sense. That's why former suggests functions not of murder, whatever implies just execution. That means limits of the foundation and to kill somebody a sensitive direct object sounded when it varies meanings of the word and according to an implication from this effect, we should be sensitive in intent rather than used by the similarity structure. And I'll apply this to the distinction between loving people and loving bodies. Although they share the same structure and the same purpose, but when the direct objects are different, the meaning of the verb and nation. So actually, you can, even though they use the same verb, but to love and have different meanings. You can refer to the universal one, which I mark as an element. So love a person really is. And you can also refer to love based on particular reasons, which I mark as IP. Love a certain person because of certain features he or she possesses, or a particular relationship, such as kinship, romantic relationship, friendship, sacrifice. So I'll say to love or loving people means universal. Love a person, really is which. While to love or loving bloggers is love based on particular reasons, which suggests love that is approved and even positively support bloggers because of their excellent actions. And I'll say to LPs and totally when the reason it is based, when the reason it is based on is unjust, that is the reason that it's self. And this is why LP waters see as LP waters is love them because of the freedom of issue and supporting their excellent actions. With even waters themselves practice LP, but this kind of LP confidence. Not just like bloggers, also love some. Bloggers love their house and don't love other houses, so they steal from other houses and their house. This explains why not LP robbers does it. One may wonder why not loving poor contributed. So a quick explanation in the thesis of loving poor, to love the loving poor is LP. It is merely based on the fact that poor are people, not based on certain features that poor possesses or a particular relationship. Then accordingly, not love poor means LP actually is not human. Suppose if the voice is set a specific context in which poor are not loved, when the verb to love is merely used as LP, for example, but not loved as friends or family members, the voice won't see not wanting to existence as but it is worth pointing out that even though the voice justify not wanting borders and even human borders, they never see robbers as non-human beasts, and thus suggest that they could or should be treated as mere beasts. If you have an impression, any ancient temporary texts of they like to present people as beasts. But boys could never present anyone as beasts, even robbers. They never say, oh, robbers is beasts. Yeah, they mentioned beasts just once, but in a very neutral way, without morals. Is that all humans are beasts? These like birds, they don't have to work, but they can feed themselves. But humans, they have to work. Yeah, so the point is try to say, oh, humans have to work hard. But there's no more in the nature there. To the contrary, you see the voice make up robbers. So this could be understood. Maybe that's the most difficult part. These people will see say, since they're people, so of course they should be included in jian'ai and my expectations. I think the voice, they do not exclude those people who become robbers from jian'ai in a prior sense. So nobody was born as a robber, right? You may be born brief, born tall or short, beautiful, less beautiful. But nobody is born to be a robber, become robbers, right? So that person who later become robbers, initially in their a process, of course, was but later when it becomes robbers, then you face the anti. It's the moral choice on robbers renders themselves against the anti, and should has to be a first idea. This is almost the end of so many traditions promote the close this version of many traditions and the promotion of close it's what makes them great traditions. So it is interesting to reflect on the very idea of close itself. I think the implication that we can get from the voice first of all, is that to sustain first of all, what is constitutive should be set aside that explains all actions, including actions aimed for. And it is because the voice set on harmony and set for those robbers, which is constitutive of jian'ai itself as a cycle. The version of universal law sustains really this the idea. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to brief performance. So please briefly.
I can establish a queue as always. Anybody? No, I mean you're free to.
But in case you lose track of these type of things. For you, start us off. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have many questions, but I will restrain myself for now. So let's just go to the first question is, if we look at classical Western utilitarianism, there's a transition that happens quite early in the tradition from Bentham to Mill. And it's in response to some of the problems that you have identified in the context of Moism. So Mill comes in and in effect provides constraints to classical hedonic utilitarianism. So I wondered if there was anything like that that happened in the Moist tradition. Was there a hard line, more extreme version, and then that was modified in the way that you suggest? Or do you think that this side constraint was there from the beginning?
According to my interpretation, according to my understanding, it is a consistent thing that they exist. So when you say meal makes sense. Then by adding constraint, so which is a constraint?
Well, here it gets a bit dodgy. I haven't read the relevant text for about 20 years, but I recall that Mill initially accepted the basic hedonic form of utilitarianism that came from Bentham, but then in response to problems that came up and his own reflection, he realized that it was not sufficient to protect core values that he thought were needed to be protected. And I think justice was one, integrity, and there are three of them. I think we could find this in probably in On Liberty. Yeah, so that provided a constraint on the original form of utilitarianism.
So I think it's similar to the possible doctrines that I described in a very abstract way. The possibility to, right? You can say, oh, it is unjust, this is. But I think the most important thing is to see when there is moral conflicts, what is the principle that you never compromise? You think that is you can compromise other things, which normally you think you shouldn't compromise. But in this, when there's moral conflict, one is all right. So if my memory is correct, I think Mill learning that word on liberty is an example, which shows that actually he does not consistently stick to not harm others. So I think the example is suppose someone is very ill, and maybe my description of this case and be a little bit unprecise. So geography is like this. So suppose someone is very ill and in the doctor's house, that's his private house for medicine or to rescue this person. But the doctor is not at home. In this case, we think is morally acceptable required to steal the medicine from doctor's house to rescue this person. I'm not saying that the boys couldn't do something different. I'm not saying that, but according to my understanding of poison, they would say, but afterwards you could still judge this breaking of people's private possession as private house as unjust, and you have to take the responsibility. You have to be blamed and you have to be punished. But maybe for utilitarianism, this is probably maybe that's too unfair. But I think there is a difference.
Okay. Just one more quick thing then. I don't want to keep the microphone too long. That leads nicely into the other thing I wanted to ask, which was, don't you think it's necessary to define what an innocent person is? Because unless that's done, I think there's not going to be a a clear-cut distinction.
Yeah.
And in a way,
It's
we'll,
like
we'll all
working
end up being robbers,
sticks off.
probably. So anyway, that was support.
But I guess that's the most difficult part, right? Yeah. Let me see how. So I think everyone, for the voice, everyone is innocent in a prior sense. And then by your moral choice, you remain to be innocent or not innocent. So for example, robbers. So this person, when before he became a robber, yeah, he was innocent. So in the a prior sense, this person should be doing jian'ai. I don't think that's very hard. But I think their definition is being hard. Maybe they take it for granted.
Yeah, thank you. We can perhaps talk later.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
That nothing the robbers do not contradict to jian'ai is because that violate C, which is not to harm the innocent. But if I do not harm the innocent, like let's say I robbed a robber. Yes. Yeah, so I do not rob innocent. He is a robber. Then it seems that do not violate C, but in the text is still the action down. So
There's a relevance part. Says crime shall not meaning speak with private authority. It's different from keeping the just execute orders. Yeah, I've never thought about this, but how important is that I rather wealthy, so you must involve in. With.
It's a very interesting topic. I never thought about this question, the potential contradiction or paradox in the most theory that on the one hand, they advocate the idea of jian'ai, but on the other hand, they said killing robbers is not killing people. But I'm wondering if there is an easier way to dissolve this paradox or contradiction, which is because we know the thesis of jian'ai, they the most text describe or characterize this thesis as following. Jian'ai means trying to, not as an individual or as a person, I care for everyone. Instead, it's more about caring for each other mutually and benefiting each other mutually as well. So once I become a robber, I harm other people, and then I no longer follow the principle of jian'ai because I'm not engaging in the practice of mutual care or mutual benefiting. Then do you think this can resolve the paradox or the contradiction that you introduced?
It's consistent with what I'm doing. So of course there are different formulations of jian'ai, but the mutual of jian'ai, I think essentially it's not different from what you try to do. So you said not each other, but in my version, I try to define the gender as not everyone, but everyone can be understood in this sense. Anyone that right. It's not that or everyone, the whole humanity, everyone, and in fact, not everyone is about. It's not like that. It's anyone. In essence, it's just everyone. Your solution. I like your solution, but why is it so different?
No, my question is because you, in your presentation, you didn't emphasize this formulation of jian'ai. So if we accept that the jian'ai means mutual, caring for each other mutually, then it is very obvious that Robert doesn't try to care for each other mutually. So there's no contradiction here.
Yeah. Very, very. I'll something. I use your arguments. Why? Yeah. It's like a receipt process. They break this. Yes.
And another question I have is that I'm wondering if I implies not killing or not punishing a robber, because by caring for a person, we do not necessarily say that we are not going to execute that person. We can still care for all the people, but we still punish the wrongdoers. So of course, I agree there is a potential paradox here, but isn't that very common that in our society when we say care for all, we mean care for all the people, but we still punish the people who has wronged others. It doesn't necessarily imply any violation of the
I
principle.
agree.
Yeah.
So that's kind of surprised to see that. Some sort of this savings of the hospital. Probably because of they use it in many different cases. Same. So it never seems to, it never seems to be a paradox. It's like,
So I think I would put it as paradox instead of contradiction. I'm not sure if my language intuition about this word is right, because it's not a clear contradiction. It's more like a paradox. At first glance, we see some tensions between these jian'ai.
I think they blame the opponents for playing the strong ones.
Okay, I see. Thank you very much for the answer. I'm also surprised to learn this.
Microphone off, it's turned. Just for the sake of this.
Yes. This topic reminds me公孙龙子's sentence is 白马非马. Yes, and we can see in your logical formula the B, and the second is suppose that the robber is a person. But in this sense, maybe 公孙龙子 would say that no, the robber is not a person. Yes, because and you also mentioned that jian'ai is universal love and it's not love particular characteristics. So can we interpret robber as people's one of the characteristics and not the person itself. Yes, yes, can we interpret in this way? Yes, or is this related to how related to 白马非马 this
Actually, the Buddhist texts also talk about this.
Yeah.
Because I'm not as familiar with that text as this one. Lesser selection, greater selection, actually, they're actually, they're having the same so I trust you, I mean, the psychology was in so I trust you.
yes, it's just a supposition.
So it's very different from points. But I'm not following the question. So what is the question?
The question is, it's just my supposition. I don't know whether it is applicable. Yes, if we interpret in this way to solve the contradiction. Yes, whether it is can be interpreted in this way in a logical way. Yes.
What way?
It is just interpret robber as a characteristic because
What's the characteristics?
of a person, not the person itself. Because white horse is a characteristic of the horse.
Property.
Property, yes, property.
But then it's going to be a very different world.
Yeah, yes,
So
yes,
it's very different from other points.
yes, yes.
So people may wonder whether the model reasoning based on this model.
Yes,
The more property takes the only.
yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm also familiar with this also. Just, even though I learned it the student, but I never act. I never think of this process. I think about it.
Thank you for sharing. I actually got it. I believe that you've actually covered playful way of thinking about jian'ai, universal love. I'm wondering if you have thought of it as the opposite. So it's like non-universal love, 不见爱. So how would you? Maybe maybe it's hard to say it now because I guess you might just maybe from your intuition now maybe what how would you describe it? It's like non-universal love, 不见爱.
Actually, the native voice they use 不爱人, 不爱, 不爱人. So 爱人 actually that means universal love a person as a person. And then 不爱人, 不见爱.
So, how would you interpret 不见爱?
不见爱.
It's like, what do you think what that is?
不见爱 is like what the dog does.
Oh, okay.
So even just one person is hard, but it's not jian'ai. So for example, you love the whole humanity except just one person.
Oh,
For enemy.
so sometimes you think of jian'ai, non-universal love is kind of has a lot to do with moral principle. So
Yes.
jian'ai is like a principle. It's like a moral principle.
Yeah, on the surface it looks like
Yeah.
it's about the scope of the people you love.
Oh, I see. I see.
Yeah, I guess I don't have a question, but I'm still trying to understand where you said that the the place where they talk about that you're not born as a robber, but you're like born as a human being who is like rich or small or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, if I come to the society, robbers also has a society in that sense for me. Like, I mean,
You're going for robber.
yeah, if you're born into a robber house, how would you?
But that won't immediately make you a robber, I guess.
Yeah, but then the education, the society matters there, right?
Oh, society.
Like you're not born as rich, or maybe you're born as rich, but it's also the society who makes you feel the feeling of that you're born in the rich family. Like, how would I know that I'm rich until the society make me that sense?
I'm trying to think of what is response. I think the boys, they truly believe in free will. So you can make a difference, matter what kinds of society or that people. You will still have free will. You can still, by your free moral choice, to forward good person. Yeah, but I agree. Your comments with recent challenge, is that they overemphasize the power of free will.
It's also
This will are slowing
yeah.
shaped by
I mean, for right now at the present, like the society matters a lot.
yes, but they don't like this. I say, you see, those good kids and bad kids. Were actually they having the same conditions, but the good kids are the good are facing the same thing with bad kids. So,
Yeah, so you put up a quote from the Motsu 17:1.
yes, that's a very famous one in condemnation of aggression. People, I rely on that text very heavily. Use it for the orders.
Yeah, I thought this was very interesting. What caught my eye about it was the last sentence. Now the superior men of the world, and that reminded me again of classical utilitarianism in the Western tradition, because Bentham was very, very clearly writing to public servants or civil servants with a lot of power to work for public good. And utilitarianism, I think later was misunderstood as a theory for individuals to apply, whereas originally it was much, it was for certain, yeah. So this is something I've often wondered about the Moist principle. And are they actually directing it at, so we might call them the Moist leaders, the civil servants in their group? Is that who this text was for? Or is it really for everyone as we tend to read it now?
Even when we read them now, they sound like an oral language addressing audience, and probably they intentionally, particularly address the leaders, rulers, who can make a big difference. Who have political authority to implement policies.
Yeah.
But still, I think that does not affect the universality of
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, more acknowledgement of that would change the way that people generally understand the text. And that's not really, it's not a criticism of your paper, it's
Yeah.
a wider point.
Actually, even in this text, it's not just talking about students. He also talks about everyone, so everyone can learn about it. It's facing everyone, not just students. Even the common.
Interesting. So I do have one more question if there's no one else in the queue. And this is about methodology. So I got the impression that your starting point was this question: how can we make the text of the Motsu logically consistent? And then you thought, well, okay, let's try this like side constraining principle and see if that works. So you get the theory as a hypothesis to test, and then you look to see if the textual evidence is consistent. Is that how you?
No, actually, it's not my method. The reason why I rely on Robert Nozick is, first of all, I think this distinction is very helpful, it's very clear. Second, I think people, especially Western audience, are more familiar with, and with these concepts, I can easily tell them what to read. But if I'm writing a Chinese paper, probably I don't have to appear to side constraint or multiple these kind of concepts. Yeah, because sometimes I call it the first principle. It's not just one. Thank you.
Maybe I'll insert myself into the queue. And people should continue to raise hands if they want to ask questions. Okay, so usual caveat for somebody from my philosophical world, which is that, I'm very much a novice with respect to the tradition that you're espousing here. So I apologize for what is surely a crude question. Anyway, with that said, I've been thinking about the sort of, or I've been wondering about the logical relation maybe between this principle of jian'ai and this side constraint. Wondering if there's some way in which the side constraint is supposed to like be logically supported by the principle, or if it's just kind of being applied here as a kind of band-aid to make the theory work. And I put it that way because, if and I guess I'll just pick an example. Like imagine I were, I guess, yeah, to take one of the Victoria's initial cases. Like imagine I was like a Bentham style utilitarian, and so I thought, what we ought to do in any given situation is maximize, the greatest amount of pleasure for as many people as possible. And then somebody came along and said, oh, but like one way to do that in some cases is to like torture this one guy, because like if we torture this one guy and like siphon his blood or something, it'll like power our whole city for 1,000 years. And like, wouldn't that just be so good? Wouldn't that be like the best we could do? And then, to avoid this like seemingly like atrocious consequence of the view, I just say, oh, well, no, because there's a side constraint. You don't torture people. And, that might make my view sort of more consistent with our moral intuitions. Well, I don't know if Bentham would say something like that. I don't recall him ever introducing any such side constraint, which is, I guess, part of the problem with Bentham's style utilitarianism. But the point was, like, if I were to try and amend his view in that way by appealing to this side constraint, I think some people would think, like, okay, sure, like, you could just have this view that's maximize pleasure for the greatest number plus don't torture. And, like, I guess that's not like a logically inconsistent conjunction of ideas. But you might worry that it's like a pretty ad hoc position as well. Like the only reason I'm appealing to the side constraint is so that my universal principle is not so universal as to reduce itself to absurdity. And so that's like a long-winded setup for the question, which is just like, is the side constraint that you're introducing on this MOIST principle like motivated by the principle, or is it just being appealed to as a way to avoid sort of undesirable theoretical consequences?
So I want that paper, so giving an impression that waste. It's right. Of course, I think it's right. I think that paper, this paper is trying to say how this is what beginning the of jian'ai itself. Because this side constraint is part of jian'ai. It's the minimum part of jian'ai. So if you get this is not jian'ai, obviously. You harm someone, well, this is I. Or if you harm one innocent, obviously jian'ai.
By this analogy, then, you could say of the Bentham style utilitarian, there's nothing baked into that utilitarian principle itself that suggests a no torture clause, which is why that kind of view is somehow worse off.
Maybe because they emphasize too much on maximization. So that can get into trouble.
Right, I was thinking that there was an intelligence problem because jian'ai is universal. So
Yeah,
it
but
also
yeah, I
maximizes-
never said university is not max. They don't have this kind of max. So for example, to do this one is saying the whole world is wrong. That's for a utilitarian, I guess that's crazy, because such a big, great consequence as they are so tempting. They're just giving these minds. We should do it probably for the utilitarian.
Well, right, that's the word. So
Yeah.
expresses. At least if you have like proper content.
Otherwise, how would you call yourself like this?
Right.
Consequence measures.
But I think I can see.
Yeah, I was thinking something similar to Ben actually. So let's say for Bentham, you know, you might kill that one person to benefit the all, right? But how about for Moas? I'm wondering, let's say if that one person, but how about we you know, let's say as a group, we don't kill that one person, but we started a country, let's say by default, everyone believes in Moism, like a religion. And for that person, and here I'm actually thinking about self-sacrifice, you know. So let's say I believe in a moral principle that I should sacrifice myself, you know, to self-destroy to, let's say, maintain the idea of jian'ai, you know. But I think there's a difference, right? You can see that, right? For Bentham, you know, Bentham might say something like, okay, how about we just kill that person, right, to benefit the all. But for Moas, you know, I guess they might do something. I'm just assuming here, okay? They might just say, okay, how about we do a self-sacrifice here, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, so I compared these two scenarios, right? In this text. So they say, if you kill another innocent person for the sake of work, then it is wrong. But if you kill yourself, self-sacrifice for the sake of work, then that's right.
Oh.
Yeah. But I find a possible problem in what we just played. So jian'ai may have different layers, right? Different requirements.
Yeah.
You can have minimum requirements. Of course, it can require you to do more. So, for example, as a moist member, jian'ai they require you to do a lot of work self-sacrifice, not just not compound, right? But most importantly, the moist they're often facing criticism that is too demanding. And I think it confuses the different requirements. So of course, for the community voice methods, the requirement of jian'ai is higher than most components. But the voice never say, oh, we should set this high standard as a universal standard for everyone. So there's no such a country based on everyone stands out everyone. So the voice, I think they're quite realistic, so everybody else, yeah, just work on ours. And you do more, your lead, of course, and then that will make it virtuous. But if you don't follow, not harm others, this basic minimum requirement, then you are unjust. It's not that you are not so virtuous, but you are unjust. So I think there is distinctions quite clear. Thank you.
Yeah, this is just a great opportunity to ask something that's always puzzled me. The concept of justice is just really complex, many different ways to understand it. And I noticed that you had the Chinese for it. Was it actually in 17.1? Yeah. So the question is, do you think that it's a direct conceptual mapping, or are there any interesting differences between a standard English use of that term justice and the E?
I'm not, I'm totally.
No, well, in political philosophy, people write books about this concept justice. So I guess the core of the question is, what does the Chinese actually mean? Yeah.
Something you must.
Native speakers of English here, because in Chinese philosophy, we also have a debate about the translation of this "e." Some would argue that it should be translated as righteous, and some would translate it as just, while others would translate it as correct or appropriate. But if you want to give a very broad and vague meaning to this "e," it will be morally incorrect, something like that. But I cannot tell the difference between justice and righteousness. So anyone has any idea about the difference of these two?
Righteousness. People normally say righteous. I'm not sensitive to English language, but some people say righteous. Sounds very religious. Becoming Bible translation.
Yes. And the English terms are coming out of the Greek and the Latin as well. So there are questions about the original meaning. Yeah, I think if we look at the Greeks, it's going to be much more like righteousness than it is like our contemporary understanding of justice. But yeah.
You will help me, what is the distinction between righteous and just?
I think it really
It's not a challenge.
It depends very much on the philosophical context. And if we go back to Plato, the term that's used, is it decay and something, it could be either righteousness or justice in the early tradition, but then later the two ideas split apart. And now in contemporary political philosophy, you don't really get anyone talking about righteousness. it's all justice, and it's
Yeah.
all by and large influenced by John Rawls's theory of justice, which is a very limited conception. Yeah, so there are different, you have to look at specific texts, specific periods, very complex.
Can you give me one example? From Plato, history of righteousness, what is the context?
Yeah, and I'm looking around, there are several people in the class who've been doing it. Which text was it? Does anyone remember? Was it the Crichton? I can find, I was looking at the Greek a couple of weeks ago. I can send you. Yeah.
So you Republic use the same word all the time for justice.
I think
Right?
I think not. I think not. Although in the English translations, maybe that's where we get the difference. But I'm not an expert in this. Our colleague that will join us at the reception hopefully might have something useful to say. She's a real Greek.
Thank you. But this is like a fundamental question. I'll have to look.
Well, I don't think you need to solve the issue for the integrity of your paper. I was just curious about the.
But actually, you see, you mentioned John Rawls. Actually, I see a lot of similarity. But it's the theory of justice, and actually, I have a panel. I don't read your work, but I'm very happy. The voice theory of justice. I'm just trying to help you read justice. So I'm trying to say what voice have this first principle, but they distinguish this first principle with comprehensive qualities. So the voice, in some sense, is seen as a comprehensive quality, but it can also be seen as a non-comprehensive quality. The non-comprehensive part is the universal part of this principle.
This looks like a pretty good time to adjourn the formal portion of our event since it's just about 7 p.m. So let's thank our speaker again and then continue downstairs for those of us interested.
Yeah, I think you were, yeah. God, I don't think I could help you.